For me, my passion for my work began when I started studying waste. Trash, rubbish, lots of words for this. But I've been fascinated by this when I started in my environmental engineering program, mostly because it involves people so closely interacting with this environmental engineering infrastructure. We all decide every day, what are we going to buy? What is that? What material is that? Paper, plastic? What do we get to decide to consume that day? And then we decide what is waste. Another person's trash is another person's treasure. We all have different choices and make different decisions about when something is at its end of life. And then we decide, do we donate this? Do we discard it? Do we recycle it? Do we compost it? You make all those choices. I also knew when I entered this field that I wanted to change it. I wanted to shift the paradigm for us thinking about waste as thinking about materials, trying to be more circular, thinking about how does nature do this in its complex systems. So let's shift this paradigm and not even think of it as waste anymore. So in 2001, when I started to hear about waste and trash ending up in our oceans, and it had been happening before that, but it really started to get into the media quite a bit at that stage, I immediately was like, well, we must be doing something wrong on land. I'm an environmental engineer. Why is our trash getting in the ocean? And so I really wanted to study this. I was told nobody cares about this issue unless you're in Alaska and Hawaii, or Hawaii. And it's true that both of those locations are really critical and have sort of been sentinels of this issue happening. But, you know, this is a global issue and the plastic travels all over the world. So I was told not to research it at the time, but luckily I didn't listen. That was one of the doors that I just ignored. So today I'm going to illustrate to you sort of our activities on land and the waste that we generate, our plastic waste specifically on land, and how that relates to the plastic that we find ending up in our ocean. I think keeping in mind that the human component of this activity is always there, and so thinking about local, state, regional, and international initiatives to mitigate this issue, you keep in mind that human component. So, why do we care about plastic in our oceans? I know some of these images are a little graphic, but this is things that happen. It has implications for our ecosystems, our marine life, and potentially human health. So it entangles seals and whales. It fills the bellies of albatrosses, and also it affects even the tiniest animals in our food web, like this zooplankton. So it doesn't biodegrade in the ocean, so all it does when it's exposed to sun and wind and rain, physical activity, is just fragment into smaller and smaller pieces. So these are pieces that were washing up on the shoreline, and then these are the pieces that we find in the middle of the ocean, and they're soon so small that we can't even see them. The other thing it does is it absorbs principal organic pollutants like DDT, pesticides, and flame retardants. And so those then are available to be transported around with the plastic. And it also houses microbiological ecosystems, its own microbiome on the plastic as well. And we don't really know the impacts from that. So part of the plastic is less dense in seawater, so it floats on the surface, typically in these smaller size particles, but we've also found it everywhere we look. We found it in sea ice, found it in sediment, found it on the bottom of the ocean as well. So in 2011, I had the pleasure or the honor to be a part of this international working group out at NC's and UC Santa Barbara, sponsored by the Ocean Conservancy. And one of the main questions we asked, as we find plastic everywhere we were looking, or scientists were finding it everywhere they're looking, was how much was going in. So in our publication in Science in 2015, we estimated that there was 275 million metric tons of plastic waste produced from 192 countries with the coastline. And then in terms of our mid-estimate of what we found going into the ocean, it was 8 million metric tons of plastic every year. So really big number, hard to imagine. So if you think about standing in a foot of coastline, you pretty much take up about that much space. In front of you, that would be equal to 5 grocery bags filled with plastic. And that's how much was going in, we estimate, every single year. So since we have country-level data for this research, we did have information from every single country, and what we saw is that population density was a huge driver of this. How many people live within 50 kilometers of the coastline in these countries, and then how much waste are they producing, how much is plastic, and then how much is mismanaged and available to get into the ocean. Some influencing factors around this are these rapidly developing middle-income countries where this environmental engineering infrastructure has not kept up with this rapid development. And so we see very high leakage from situations like that. It also points to where this is probably heading in the future. Many of these countries that you see more darkly shaded are aware that they have this issue. It's very evident as you walk around. But what we can do now is hopefully get in front of this wave as future economic development continues around the world. And even in the US, where we have a large coastal population and we have a high waste generation rate, we see issues as well. So what happens for the future? So in a business as usual scenario, so if we don't have any interventions, we see this quantity doubling by 2025, and this would be a cumulative input of 155 million metric tons. So why is this leaking, especially plastic, leaking into our environment? So first of all, it has very little value. So plastic is made from fossil fuels, usually petroleum or natural gas. And as a part of the refinement of those materials, you make lots of chemicals and products, and the polymers that make plastic are just one of those. There's a huge inertia that we're up against there, and it doesn't have a lot of value once it's been done and used. And then in use, we have a material that's designed to last basically forever, but we use it for a very short time period. So we kind of can imagine this line sort of as a pipeline to the ocean, and we see plastic going down this. At the end, we'd like to see zero input. Once plastic is in our ocean and it's breaking down into these small particles, it's extremely difficult logistically and economically to get it out of the ocean, so we want to prevent it from going in the first place. But if you look at this whole value chain, you can see you can have intervention points anywhere along the way. And this opens up a lot of creativity and innovation all along that to help mitigate the issue. So a few examples, I think. So in the U.S., where we have, this high per person waste generation rate, we have sort of the luxury of being able to make choices about single-use items. We can do really simple things, reusable water bottles, reusable mugs, reusable bags, saying no to straws or using a reusable one. I know these seem very mundane and simple, but the thing is that really through my research, because population density is such a big driver in our actions, our drivers, every individual action taken collectively really can have a huge impact. And I think President Obama recently alluded to this when he spoke at our ocean conference about, when he was talking about the Montreal Protocol and the phase out of CFCs and whether or not one person's use of spray-on deodorant could matter. And I think we really illustrated that collectively our choices do make a difference. Finally, I think further upstream in this, we need to look at new materials. And so at the University of Georgia, we've started a new materials institute, a good institute. We heard institute a lot with a lot of bad terms, so this is a good institute. We're going to be using green engineering principles, and so if we had been using those to produce our materials and products, we would be actually avoiding a lot of these externalities that we're seeing now. We're also going to be thinking about the circular economy, which is really taking hold globally in a big way. And so that helps to keep these materials at a high value and keeping them in our economic system. Both of these principles really promote a bio-benign material and product. Also keeping our materials made from fewer different types of materials, so keeping them more homogenized actually really helps with keeping their value. I think policies for regarding items of concern can really help in motivating. And I think really as people become more aware of this issue, they're demanding that companies reduce their waste and also demanding that companies provide infrastructure and other means for them to reduce their personal waste. So I think keeping in mind that there's people behind this issue, we really need to think about creative, socially, and culturally appropriate solutions. I'm very optimistic that we can do this. I'm an engineer and a researcher. I'm going to continue working really hard on the science and to inform policy, but you all have an amazing opportunity. I think one thing that's different about this issue is it's very visible. So I think from the public and private sector and all across party lines, nobody wants to see plastic in our ocean. So we really have, I think, a great opportunity to all work together towards solutions. And a good example of this was the Microbead Free Waters Act. It was a great bipartisan issue that kind of sailed through Congress and was signed by the president quickly. And so I think this is an issue where we can all sort of learn how to come together and address, and maybe that can relate to future issues as well, pave the way for addressing other issues. So quickly, just to show you the power of collective action, this is the mobile app that we developed in 2011, and it was originally funded by NOAA, and I'll talk about some of the partners in a second, but basically it's really, really simple. Anyone all over the world, inland, on the open ocean, or on a coastline can tell us about litter that you find, and hopefully you're able to pick up. But the amazing thing is that without being in a group of people, you know that you're in this great collective effort. And yes, we term these citizen scientists. It raises awareness about science, but you don't need to be a scientist. All you do is open this up, and in 2 taps you've told us and contributed to this amazing data set. We do have over 1 million items now, so this is over 1 million items that have not gone into our ocean waves. And some of our newer partners are 11th Hour Racing and Keep America Beautiful in Tampa Bay. So before I close, I'd really like to thank Senator Whitehouse again for his passion and leadership on this issue. I was at the Our Ocean meeting 2 weeks ago, and he moderated a panel there, and that was an amazing and inspiring conference and event. I think seeing countries from all over the world, NGOs and other groups really committing both protection and resources to the ocean was really inspiring, and I look forward to seeing how that moves forward. And Senator Whitehouse has also co-chaired a hearing for the Environment and Public Works Committee that was actually, again, a great illustration of the bipartisan progress, I think, that can be made on this issue. Again, hopefully as an example, and that could spread to other issues as well. So finally, I think we hold the solution to this problem in the palm of our hands. It's a global issue, but we also have local solutions. So I think we have a huge opportunity to work together across boundaries, party lines. Together we can change the way we think about waste. Materials, we can think about the way we design products for their end-of-life management, valuing secondary materials, collect, capture, contain waste, think more circular. We can open up new jobs and opportunities for economic innovation, improving living conditions for millions of people around the world, and protect our oceans. Thank you.
Hi, and thank you very much for your leadership on this. I haven't heard much about biodegradability recently. Is there hope for us in that? Is it possible, however, that biodegraded materials can be more easily ingested or more toxic for the environment? Thank you.
That's a really great question. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of materials that have been in the marketplace that have been labeled biodegradable or and that aren't. There's one term called oxo-degradable, and unfortunately all that is an additive to the polymer that makes it break down into smaller pieces faster. So those are not actually biodegradable. There's a polymer called PLA that is industrial compostable, but it has to reach a high enough temperature. So if you take a product and put that in your home compost, that won't biodegrade there either. So there's been sort of misunderstanding on the environment that it needs to be in to biodegrade. And then, of course, then your next point, we are looking at new polymers at the Institute and testing them for biodegradability. But you're absolutely right in that you would need to also look at additives. So plastic is not just a polymer. There's many, many additives that help make it a color, make it soft, antimicrobial. There's all these things that then, if the polymer itself biodegraded, are these additives then an issue? So you want to make sure those are biobenign as well. So it's pretty complex, but certainly that is, that's what many of the cutting edge folks are trying to figure out. Can we have a material that would be, but then of course you wouldn't want to just manage it by throwing it in the environment, because you would impact the ecosystem by providing this new food source as well. So you'd still want to do like composting or anaerobic digestion in the biomass cycling of that material.
Thanks for that. Can you tell us what proportion of the plastic waste in the ocean is drink bottles and other packaging? Because we had a solution for that, which was reusable bottles. And those were pushed aside largely by a lobbying effort from the plastics and chemical industry. And then before that, even by the glass industry to have non-reusable bottles. So has there been discussion of more systemic solutions, not just expecting individuals to be more careful with plastic? And then again, how much of the problem is this? Thanks.
Yes, definitely. So those upstream actions that I was alluding to, I think are really important. And I think I had a point in here about policy that I didn't get to say, but now I can. And I think so economics have driven that glass and reusable situation to this dispensable model, as well as some of the lobbying and other work that you're alluding to. But I think economics of transportation have been big. So actually many, many companies have done a huge move to sustainability by lightweighting and making things out of plastic and smaller amounts of plastic, which in our world oftentimes means people can lose it easier. The caps have gotten, I think, kind of almost minuscule on top of a water bottle, and it's actually then easier to lose it. And so but then they are like, well, we've reduced all these carbon emissions from transportation and things like that. So I think that's been one of the drivers that we've seen. Your question about, do we know how much of this material is a certain type, straws I've been asked about, or beverage bottles, etc. We don't, because in solid waste data, we only have % of plastic, but we do from the standpoint of the Ocean Conservancy runs the International Coastal Cleanup every year, so we can look at their top 10 items. Through Marine Debris Tracker with 1 million items now, I can tell you exactly what we see the most of or what people are reporting the most of. So we know what's ending up mismanaged in our environment, and so we can target those. And from our perspective, we're thinking about trying to do a zero waste model where we can recycle or reuse. We're looking at the most problematic materials that are ending up in the environment, usually because they have no value. PET is what drink bottles are made of, and actually many of those, well, not many, but it has the highest recycling rate of any of the plastic because it has the highest value. So how can we keep it having a value, and what are the problematic materials and items that just end up in the environment? So kind of a long answer.
Hi, good morning. My name is Terry Gray. I'm from the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. I run some of the waste management programs here. One of the things that we've looked at to manage some of the difficult to dispose of waste are extended producer responsibility, and trying to get the manufacturers to come to the table and pay for a portion of the management of this stuff at the end of its life. I was wondering if you looked at that. We've thought about extending EPR into packaging, but it's really challenging, and we haven't really figured out how to do it yet. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that type of approach.
Yes, I definitely do. And I've seen illustrations where EPR works very well. One of them is Norway, but it's not just done there, it's also in British Columbia. But in Norway, they have a requirement, and the government requires the companies who are selling, and these are specifically PET beverage bottles, to guarantee that they are not only collected but recycled. And so then they can choose, this then spawned this development of different companies who provide that service. So there's like 4 different companies that you can then hire to make sure your bottles are collected. So one of them is called Infinitum. They do a deposit on the bottles to make sure that motivates people to bring them back. They have return vending machines at the grocery store, and then they are able to do bottle-to-bottle recycling because they then say to the brands that, or the companies that hire them, you need to make your bottles in a certain way. So what EPR can do is have this whole entire influence up the value chain to where they are making the highest value PET bottle that they can, that can be recycled bottle to bottle. And so yes, exactly what you're saying. I think some of those policies can influence the way we design our products and the way things operate, because if they have to pay for that at the end, they want to do it as efficiently as possible. So there's that great motivation.
Is there any particular emphasis on design of, let's say, containers to be able to make their components separable? A lot of things now are getting heat connected together, and the user cannot separate it for recycling.
Yes, that would be something that is part of the green engineering principles that we would recommend to do, where you can dismantle them into their separate materials. But there's many sort of layered plastic. Just even think of like a chip bag or something. There's all kinds of layers in there, so it looks kind of like metal, but it's not. The silvery kind. So yes, I think that's a problem, and it would be something. It's really a design flaw, in our opinion. So.
Jenna, in the ocean state, the most prolific type of trash, marine debris, is another word for it, that we find along the beaches and shoreline here, are cigarette butts. And it would seem much as the bottling industry, beverage industry dealt with flip-top cans years ago, it would seem with a one single innovation in cigarette butts, biodegradability could be accomplished, but I have no clue about the chemistry. Can you just comment on the prospects for that?
Sure. And you alluded to a great example of where there was a design flaw that was changed, and that was when our beverage cans, the aluminum cans, had the tab that was actually came off. And they were just finding those all over in the environment, and they said, wait a minute, is there some way where we can keep that tab on? And then the cans are the way they are today, is that you just bend it forward and it stays on the can, so you don't find those in the environment. So that's the kind of thinking we need to address these issues. So for cigarette butts, the filter itself is made of cellulose acetate, which does not biodegrade. So they are a huge problem. I think you have a lot of misconception that they're paper and that they will biodegrade, but they don't. And I actually am not aware of a new sort of design for those in terms of changing that, but they certainly are the most literature that we find as well. Thank you so much.